Joining us now is Elise Labott. She is the Edward R. Murrow Press Fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, and Bradley Bowman. He is the Senior Director of the Foundation of Defense of Democracy Center for Military and Political Power. Thank you both for being with us here. It has been a weekend of very high anxiety. Elise, starting with you, do you think that this ceasefire is going to stand?
I think it might stand for, the next 24 to 48 hours, maybe even for a couple of days or weeks, Scotty. But sources that I've spoken to in the region say clearly it's good news for now, but they don't think it will hold. And why won't it hold? Because the actual objectives of both sides are really not, have really not been met. The Iranian program, as we've been talking about over the last few days, was not completely, as President Trump said, obliterated. It was damaged. But Iran still, we've talked a little bit about some of that nuclear fissile material that could go for a nuclear weapon, that enriched uranium. We don't know where it is. It's unaccounted for. It's pretty likely, because we haven't had any radiation damage reported, that it's being, hid. And some satellite imagery from experts, nuclear experts, show that it has been moved around even before the U.S. strikes, and even, as they knew the Israelis were going to hit. So that's on one side. On the Israeli side, the Israelis have a different agenda than the United States. It's pretty clear that President Trump wants to get this in his rearview mirror. He wants to move on from this war. The Israelis have talked about regime change. President Trump, even though he's kind of flirted at it, is not interested in that. And so President Trump wants to, end this war, call it a day. I think Israel has been beat up. It's still taking, obviously it did a lot of damage to Iran's nuclear facilities, but it took a lot of missiles. There were casualties, and its interceptors are dwindling down as faster than they can produce them. So I think in what I've talked to sources in the region, they say, look, it's possible that everybody kind of wants to, the Israelis and the Iranians want to stop the fighting, regroup, live to fight another day. The Iranians still haven't said that they're ready to abandon their nuclear program entirely. So that either means more strikes by the U.S. and or Israel, or it means regime change. But the Iranian program is going to live another day.
Yeah, Elise, thanks. And Brad, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how and what a ceasefire looks like in this particular case. What does officially Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, there will officially be an end to the war. What does that look like on a practical end here?
I think if you're confused by the social media post, you're not alone. I mean, in this single post, Trump announced the ceasefire. A confusing timeline, as your question implies. Name the war and extended blessings and thanks to all. So not too shabby for a single social media post. But all joking aside, we have a ceasefire announced, but the shooting continues. And I'm not going to say the deal is done until we actually have a ceasefire. Right. And as Elise suggested, not all ceasefires are good. Some are bad. And how do you judge between a good and a bad ceasefire? I'd say whether it addresses the sources of the conflict. And from an Israeli perspective, and I would say from the correct perspective, the source of the conflict here is a regime that is dedicated to the destruction of Israel, that is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. And has the largest ballistic missile program in the Middle East. And so until that, and has been pursuing inch by inch, moving closer and closer toward a nuclear weapons capability. Until those fundamental dynamics change, I think it's a little premature to announce a forever ceasefire, because forever is a long time. And Israel's not willing to accept a status quo where you have a regime dedicated to its destruction and pursuing the world's most dangerous weapon.
And Elise, was this attack by Iran, the one on a U.S. base, was that an off-ramp, as we're kind of being led to believe here? Is Iran on its last leg? Put it into context for us here.
I don't think Iran is on its last leg. I think what it wanted to do was show strength, show that it was going to respond. It couldn't just, not do anything, but it certainly didn't want to escalate it further. It didn't want to really get into a protracted war with the United States. The war with Israel and those initial strikes were enough. So I think it wanted to show some strength, but also signal that it's ready to, end the fighting. We're not talking about negotiation. And President Trump from what they've been saying, ending all your nuclear ambitions and, getting rid of all your fissile material and no enrichment is not a negotiation. That's a surrender. Earlier today, the Supreme Leader said anybody that knows Iran knows that we never surrender. So, I mean, I think this kind of puts everything in abeyance. I think, to your point on the ceasefire, Israel wasn't going to, stop fighting until it saw that Iran was going to stop fighting. And, President Trump, if he did, in fact, come up with the idea, it's possible the Israelis did. But, if he did, look, this is a victory for President Trump. It could be a temporary victory. I think ultimately the, root causes, as we were saying, of the conflict are still there. And so I think that certainly everybody's going to sigh a breath of relief tonight if the next 24-hour holds. But it's going to be a precarious days, weeks, and possibly months.
Yeah, the root causes are still there. The nuclear concern was one of them, but also externally for those Persians or Iranians here in the United States and for a lot of people that live in Iran, there was that wishful thinking of a potential revolution that would overthrow this regime. Do you think that is still very much wishful thinking? Is that a possibility, especially in the 12-hour window where we don't know what the details are, but the IDF can continue to fire upon with complete air superiority over Iran and potentially take out more leadership?
I don't.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
Oh, cool.
Sorry. Go ahead, Bradley.
No. At least go. At least go ahead, and then we'll go to Bradley. Okay, perfect. Bradley, go ahead.
Great question and a great analysis by Elise. I'll add my 2 cents quickly. If there is in fact a ceasefire, I'm going to be watching the negotiations that follow. And from my perspective, the Iranian regime has been using negotiations for years to basically create a patient pathway to a nuclear weapons capability. And so I think the Trump administration is going to demand a full and permanent dismantlement of Iran's nuclear weapons program and its strategic missile capabilities. And I don't see a world where this regime is going to agree to that. And so I think along with demanding such an agreement like that, it's wise for the United States to be doing a max support for the Iranian people. I'm not arguing for a U.S. military regime change. I am not. I am saying let's support the Iranian people in their effort, should they choose to do so, to finally have a government that is interested in their well-being rather than being the leading exporter of terrorism.
And Elise, final word to you. Do you think that, we could see a potential homegrown revolution after the dust settles from all this?
I think that's really what it's going to be. But, President Trump kind of flirted with the idea yesterday saying, if they're not going to make Iran great and they're not going to abandon their nuclear weapons, then why shouldn't there be? President Trump is not going to take out the Iranian leader. And let's note that he's decreased democracy funding for Iran, both in his last administration and this administration. The Israelis said to the Iranian people, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, this is your chance. We prepped the ground for you. Let's rise up. I think there's going to be talks between the Israelis and the Iranian opposition. However, the Iranian opposition is not, organized. And so I think there's a lot of talks going on in Iran right now. I think organizations like Bradley's that do a lot of good work in Iran with Iranian opposition and talking to the diaspora around the world. I think there are a lot of conversations going on. I don't think the euphoria that maybe there was a couple of days ago is going to last very long. But watch this space, Scotty.
Yeah, Elise Labott and Bradley Bowman, we will, and hopefully we'll be doing with both of you guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah.